Hello and welcome to day 44 of revising UPSC previous year questions for UPSC 2027. In this video, I will cover GS2 of the year 2019. Yesterday, GS1 and GS2 were done of UPSC 2026, and if you see the paper of GS2 of yesterday, you will find that many questions were like directly or indirectly from the previous year question papers. Like if you see the US and they ask about the US Constitution, the comparison between US and Indian Constitution. So they asked it like consecutively for the third year. They asked in 24, 25, and now in 26. They asked for about the governors and all. I will do a video on that. Whenever I do it, I will tell you more that how much it has resemblance with the previous year questions. So previous year questions will never be outdated, guys. And they also asked one question from the act, which was based in 2019, if I'm not wrong. I had seen the paper, but I will do a detailed analysis, or I will solve that paper as well, but later when the mains will be done. So let's get started with the year 2019 GS2. Question number 1. Do you think that Constitution of India does not accept principle of strict separation of powers, rather it is based on the principle of checks and balance? Example: the Indian Constitution does not embrace the rigid watertight separation of powers seen in the US presidential model. Instead, as affirmed in Ram Javaya Kapoor versus State of Punjab 1955, it establishes a parliamentary system of functional overlap moderated by an institutional framework of checks and balances. Checks and balances, constitutional overlap. So you can go through this checks and balances architecture: executive, legislature, judiciary, executive, and judiciary, legislature. Executive legislature overlap. Executive accountability: the Council of Ministers is drawn from and collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha, Article 75(3). Executive law making: the President Governor promulgates ordinances during legislative recess, Article 123 and 213. Judiciary executive balance. Judicial review: the higher judiciary reviews executive actions for ultra vires and fundamental rights violation, Article 32 and 226. Administrative appointments. The executive appoints judges, while Article 50 directs separation of the judiciary from the executive in public services. These are important articles. Even if you read the Lakshmikant or whatever notes you are following, these are directly like potential prelims questions. Okay, so go through this whether they are in this answer or not. Judiciary legislature balance. Constitution scrutiny. Courts can invalidate unconstitutional statutes via the basic structure doctrine, Kesavananda Bharati, while Parliament holds the power to impeach judges, Article 124, Clause 4. By blending functional interdependence with mutual oversight, the Constitution prevents majoritarian tyranny while ensuring accountable, flexible governance. Question to the Central Administrative Tribunal, which was established for redressal of grievances and complaints by or against the central government employees, nowadays is exercising its powers as an independent judicial authority. Explain. The Central Administrative Tribunal CAT was established under Article 323A via the Administrative Tribunals Act 1985 to provide speedy specialized adjudication of recruitment and service disputes for central public servants. Evolution as an independent judicial authority. Judicial evolution of CAT: administrative dispute body, then High Court status, Sampath Kumar case, then writ subject court, Chandra Kumar. So equivalence to regular civil courts. Under Section 17 of the 1985 Act, CAT exercises the same contempt powers as a high court, enabling it to summon records, enforce witness attendance, and execute orders. Substantive substantive independence safeguards. Benches comprise a judicial member, former HC judge, district judge, and an administrative member, ensuring specialized legal rigor. Judicial benchmark evolution. S.P. Sampath Kumar, 1987, the Supreme Court held CAT to be an effective institutional substitute for High Courts in service matters. L. Chandra Kumar versus Union of India, 1997, clarified that CAT operates as a court of first instance. Its orders remain subject to judicial review under Article 226 and 227 before a division bench of the High Court. Binding judicial directives exercises independent judicial discretion in quashing arbitrary executive transfers, disciplinary penalties, and unconstitutional promotion rules. CAT has evolved from a departmental grievance redresser into an independent quasi-judicial institution balancing civil servant rights and rights with administrative discipline. Question 3. What are the methods used by the farmers' organizations to influence the policymaker in India, and how effective are these methods? Farmer organizations act as a vital agrarian interest and pressure groups in India. Example, BKU, Samyukta Kisan Morcha. Utilizing institutional and extra constitutional strategies to influence public policy under Article 19(1). Methods used to influence policymakers. So, farmer mobilization matrix, direct and disruption method, institutional and legal channels. So you can go through this. Mass agitations and road blockades, sustained sit-ins, chakka jam, and long tractor rallies to disrupt transport arteries and force central attention. Institutional negotiations and submissions, submitting representations to the Commission for Agricultural Cost and Prices, CSCP, and engaging in ministerial talks. Legal and judicial recourse, challenging unfavorable agrarian legislations and mandi rules through public interest litigations in the Supreme Court. Electoral mobilization, leveraging rural agrarian vote banks during state and general elections to extract policy concessions. Evaluation of their effectiveness. High tangible successes. Successfully compelled the repeal of the 3 Farm Acts 2021 and secured recurring state-level farm loan waivers and power subsidies. Structural limitations often dominated by affluent farmers from Green Revolution belts, Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, frequently overlooking marginal tenant and tribal farmers from eastern and dryland regions. While effective in resisting adverse policies, farmer groups must institutionalize constructive policy advocacy via Niti Aayog consultative platforms to achieve long-term agrarian reforms. Question 4. From the resolution of contentious issues regarding distribution of legislative powers by the courts, principle of federal supremacy and harmonious construction have emerged. Explain. The Indian Constitution demarcates legislative powers under the 7th Schedule, Article 246. When subject entries overlap or conflict across union, state, and concurrent lists, the judiciary applies the doctrine of federal supremacy and harmonious construction to maintain balance. Judicial evolution of the two principles. Legislative adjudication doctrine of harmonious construction and principle of federal supremacy. The doctrine of harmonious construction objective avoids direct conflict between overlapping entries by interpreting them broadly and constructively so that both union and state powers coexist. I'm sorry, guys. Judicial application in State of Bombay versus FN Balsara 1951 and Gujarat University versus Krishna Ranganath Mudolkar 1963. The Supreme Court ruled that an entry is one list and that an entry in one list must not be read in a way that renders an entry in another list meaningless. Principle of federal supremacy. Objective in irreconcilable irreconcilable direct statutory contradictions. Constitutional backing. Article 2461 gives the union list non-obstant Article 2461 gives the union list non-obstant precedence over state and concurrent list. Article 254 establishes union law supremacy over conflicting state enactments on concurrent subjects unless saved by presidential assent under Article 2542. Judicial enforcement upheld the Hoist Pharmaceuticals versus State of Bihar 1983. These judicial doctrines preserve legislative harmony, preventing jurisdictional deadlock while upholding the constitutional balance of Indian federalism. Question 5. What can France learn from the Indian constitution approach to secularism? See, you can see the three countries are fixed: USA, France, and UK. They asked one of these in comparison. One question is fixed, guys, in GS2. One comparison between these three. This means one of these three: India versus France, India versus UK, India versus USA. And recently, you can see USA is hot favorite in last 7 years. Now I'm including 2026 as well. So 3 consecutive years, 2024, 25, 26, and how many years left? So 4 years left, and I think they asked 4 to 5 times India versus USA out of these 7 years. So you can see how important USA is for the government, but you have to go through all of these three: France, USA, and UK. So French secularism, laïcité or whatever it is in French, I do not know. So pronounce it in French. So French secularism mandates the strict separation of church and state, privatizing religion. In contrast, Indian secularism, Article 25 to 28, embodies principled equal respect, sarvadharma sambhava, and regulated accommodation for all faiths. Key lessons France can learn from Indian secularism. France can learn from Indian secularism. Good. Comparative secularism model. French model and Indian model. So you can go through this. Accommodating religious diversity in public life. France's ban on conspicuous religious symbol in public school, example hijabs, turban, crosses, causes minority alienation. How crosses creates minority alienation when they are majority Christians. India protect the wearing of religious attire and identity in public spaces. Article 25 fostering social inclusion. State support for minorities. India grants religious and linguistic minorities the constitutional right to establish and administer educational institutions. Article 30 adding cultural preservation. Actually, look, in India also you can wear, but only the essential things, okay? The things which are not essential, so the state might stop you wearing that. For example, state will not and will never stop the Sikh wearing turban because that is essential in the Sikh religion. But a state can ask a Hindu or a Muslim not to have a tilak or not to have any hijab or any like cap in school, okay, because these are not essentials. Principal reformative intervention. Indian secularism permits the state to intervene to eradicate oppressive social practices. Example, outlawing untouchability via Article 17, reforming personal laws while safeguarding essential religious practices, fostering multicultural fraternity, equal state respect. Equal state respect prevents majoritarian or secular authoritarianism, strengthening democratic fraternity. Preamble. By transitioning from rigid exclusion to principled accommodation, France can better integrate diverse immigrant communities, harmonizing liberty with plural social cohesion. Although, look, UPSC asked this question, but I personally think India needs to learn from France rather than France needs to learn from Indian secularism. Question 6. Despite consistent experience of high growth, India still goes with the lowest indicators of human development. Examine the issues that make balanced and inclusive development elusive. Despite ranking among the world's fastest growing major economies, India ranks low on the UNDP Human Development Index, reflecting a persistent disconnect between headline GDP expansion and equitable human capability enhancement, issues hindering balanced and inclusive development. So, growth HDR disconnect matrix, inequitable resource divide, underfunded social sectors, and jobless growth and informality, skewed growth and wealth concentration. Top 1%. Do not go into these symbols, dollar, and all those. I do not know why it does that, but okay, I will read it for you. So top 1% holds over 40% of national wealth. Oxfam report, resulting in a K-shaped economic trajectory where capital owners gain while real informal wages stagnate. Chronic social sector underfunding. Public expenditure on healthcare, that is 2.1% of GDP, and education, 3 to 4% of GDP, remains well below national health policy and NEP targets, national education policy targets, which are of 6% of GDP. So informal and jobless growth. Over 85% of the labor force is trapped in informal employment, lacking social safety nets with low female workforce participation, that is 37%. Interstate and rural urban cleavages, pronounced developmental divides between southern western industrial states and lagging hinterland regions in Niti Aayog aspirational district data. Achieving balanced growth demands transitioning from output driven metrics to capability centric development, investing heavily in public health, foundational education, and social protection. SDG 1, 3, 4, and 10. Question 7. There is a growing divergence in the relationship between poverty and hunger in India. The shrinking of social expenditure by the government is forcing the poor to spend more on non-food essential items, squeezing their food budget. Elucidate. The classical correlation where falling income poverty automatically resolved hunger has decoupled in India, despite statistical drops in headcount poverty, child undernutrition, and micronutrient deficiencies remain severe. Global hunger index NFHS5, driven by shifting household expenditure dynamics. Non-food squeeze on household food budgets. The food budget squeeze mechanism, high out-of-pocket outlays, health, education, fuel, depleted household cash, and it results into the downtrading to calorie dense, low nutrient diets, hidden sugar spike. Out-of-pocket health expenses, OOPE, out-of-pocket medical spending forces low-income households to divert cash away from balanced food baskets to meet healthcare emergencies. Privatization of basic education, rising spending on private schooling, coaching, and transport squeezes residual household income, surging utilities and transport costs, and elastic expenditures on cooking gas, electricity, and commuting consume large portion of daily wages. Dietary downtrading, hidden hunger, squeezed budgets force families to prioritize cheap, energy-dense cereals, subsidized via PMJ/KY over nutrient-dense proteins, fruits and vegetables worsening malnutrition. Bridging this divergence requires expanding universal public health care, subsidized quality education, and transforming food security from mere calorie provision to diversified national security under Poshan 2.0 SDG 2. Question 8. Implementation of information and communication technology ICT based projects programs usually suffers in terms of certain vital factors. Identify these factors and suggest measures for their effective implementations. While information and communication technology ICT holds immense potential for responsive e-governance, systemic infrastructural behavioral and architectural bottlenecks often hinder the successful execution of public digital projects. Critical failure factors in ICT projects. ICT implementation bottlenecks or digital infrastructure gaps, organizational resistance, and design and inclusion issues. You can go through this. Last mile connectivity and hardware deficit, bandwidth limitations, and erratic power supply in rural and tribal regions. BharatNet implementation delays, bureaucratic inertia and skill deficit, resistance to administrative business process re-engineering BPR, and low digital capacity among lower tier civil servants. Exclusionary architecture, lack of vernacular interfaces, biometric authentication failures, and complex UI UX designs that exclude digitally illiterate citizens. Data privacy and interoperability silos, departmental data silos, and cybersecurity vulnerabilities causing severe outages. Measures for effective implementation, business process re-engineering, BPR redesign, administrative workflows prior to software development. Second ARC 11th report, inclusive and voice-enabled interfaces, implementing multilingual AI-powered conversational chatbots, example, Bhashini platform and assisted access common service center, CSCs. Capacity building, upskill public personnel through mission Karma Yogi and institutionalize robust data audits under the DPDP Act. Transforming ICT projects from technocentric portals into empathetic citizen-centric public infrastructure is crucial to achieving inclusive digital governance, SDG 16. Question 9. The time has come for India and Japan to build a strong contemporary relationship, one involving global and strategic partnership that will have a great significance for Asia and the world as a whole. Comment. The India-Japan special strategic and global partnership has evolved from traditional development assistance into a comprehensive strategic partnership serving as a primary anchor for peace, stability, and maritime order across the Indo-Pacific. Significance for Asia and the world. India-Japan strategic convergence. Indo-Pacific pre-order economic and supply chain, and multilateral coalition. You can go through this. Preserving a free and open Indo-Pacific. Joint commitment to a rules-based maritime order, freedom of navigation, and peaceful dispute resolution counters unilateral aggression across the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Strategic infrastructure and connectivity. Joint infrastructure investments such as the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor and high-speed rail corridors offer sustainable, depth-resilient connectivity alternatives to predatory lending. Resilient supply chains and tech cooperation, anchoring the supply chain resilience initiatives SCRI alongside Australia reduces critical dependencies in semiconductors, clean energy and telecom, defense and mini-lateral convergence, deepened defense interoperability via the acquisition and cross-serving agreement ACSA, bilateral exercises, Therm Guardian, GIMAX or GMAX, whatever, and the Quad. Indo-Pacific connectivity, India, Japan across maritime sea lines. You can go through the map, but as I always said, as I always say that this is for the reference. You should go through the atlas. Okay, I do not put the atlas or books maps here, so you can go through the atlas, and you should go through the atlas as well. So this is the route. You can see Strait of Malacca and all, because these are AI generated maps, and it has not this map, but yeah, even this map has, you can see it is not correct. So they have the faults or deformities, whatever you wanted to say. So this is just for the reference that you should know which map you have to see. Okay, so you can go through the original maps from the atlas. Deepening India-Japan strategic synergy provides a stabilizing equilibrium against unilateral hegemony, championing an inclusive rules-based multilateralism across the global south. Question 10. Too little cash, too much politics leaves UNESCO fighting for life. Discuss the statement in the light of US withdrawal and its accusation of the cultural body as being anti-Israel bias. The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, established to build the defenses of peace in the minds of men, faces recurring institutional and financial crisis driven by geopolitical polarization and superpower politicization. Financial and geopolitical dimensions of the crisis. So, UNESCO institutional paralysis, financial asphyxiation, and intense politicization. Okay, the financial crisis, too little cash, loss of major assessed dues to the withdrawal and withholding of mandatory financial dues by the United States, which historically contributed 22% of UNESCO's operational budget following Palestine's admission in 2011, crippled key literacy and cultural heritage preservation programs. Over reliance on earmarked voluntary funds, funding gaps forced the agency to depend on tied voluntary contributions, compromising its independent multilateral mandate. Geopolitical politicization, too much politics, accusation of anti Israel bias, the designation of contentious holy sites in Hebron and the old city of Jerusalem as Palestinian World Heritage Sites led the US and Israel to accuse UNESCO of politicization, promoting their 2017-19 withdrawals. Cultural bodies as diplomatic battlegrounds. Sovereign states frequently use heritage listening committees to wage symbolic diplomatic warfare rather than advancing cultural preservation. Sustaining UNESCO's vital global mandate requires depoliticizing cultural heritage designations and securing stable, unearmarked multilateral funding mechanism to protect shared global heritage. SDG 11.4. Question 11. On what grounds a people's representative can be disqualified under the Representation of People Act 1951? Also mention the remedies available to such person against his disqualification. The Representation of People Act RPA 1951 operationalizes constitutional disqualification under Article 102(1)(e) and 191(1)(e), establishing statutory grounds to maintain probity, accountability, and the rule of law in legislative bodies. Look, guys, you do not need to wrote the constitution page by page, right? Even if you go through these questions, and whenever you write these questions in practice, what you have to do, just take a separate sheet and write this article. Wherever you find any article in any answer, write it separately, that this article related to this, and you should go through this, and you should go through those answers as well repeatedly, right? So it will help you create a solid fodder for your actual answer writing. If you see the 2026, guys, the paper, if you see it like in isolation, like only the 2026 paper, you might felt that it was a tough paper. But if you go through, even if you go through the single reading of the last 5 years, 6 years or 7 years of previous year papers, you will feel confident that the question asked in 2026 are not like out of nowhere, right? They are related and absolutely related whatever they asked in the previous years, right? So yesterday I saw the paper, and by that time when I saw the paper, I went through 6 years of the previous year papers of GS2, and I felt confident. Like, I already wrote one mains, but I felt confident after looking at the paper. Like, it is not like you cannot answer. And if you go through the previous year questions repeatedly with addition of current affairs, you will definitely gonna crack it. I am betting on it. Okay. So let's get back to this. The Representation of the People Act RPA 1951 operationalizes constitutional disqualification under Article 1021E and 1911E, establishing statutory grounds to maintain probity, accountability, and the rule of law in legislative bodies. So you can go through this, like RPA 1951 disqualification spectrum, criminal convictions, section 8, conviction 2 years. Don't go into this symbols and all, corrupt practices and contracts, section 8A, and all, election non-compliance, section 10. So statutory ground for disqualification under RPA 1951, section 8, criminal convictions, section 8(1), conviction for specific offenses promoting enmity, bribery, rape, or customs violation lead to a 6-year disqualification. Section 8(3), conviction for any offense with imprisonment more than 2 years result in immediate disqualification during imprisonment, plus an additional 6-year ban post-release. Lily Thomas versus Union of India. Section 8A, corrupt electoral practices, disqualification up to 6 years upon a High Court finding of corrupt practices, bribery, booth capturing under Section 123. Section 9 and 9A, dismissal and government contracts, dismissal from government services for corruption, disloyalty, or holding subsisting contracts for supply of goods, works to the government. Section 10 and 10A, office holding and expenditure defaults, holding an office of director, manager in a state-owned corporation, or failure to lodge election expense accounts within the statutory time frame. Legal remedies available against disqualification. Remedy channel and mechanism: statutory authority, appellate stay on conviction, securing a specific judicial stay on the conviction, not merely suspension of sentence, from an appellate court under Section 389 CRPC, restores membership. Lok Prahari versus Election Commission of India. Election Commission's power, Section 11. The Election Commission of India may, for recorded reasons, reduce or remove any disqualification except under Section 8A. Judicial review, challenging arbitrary disqualification orders via writ petitions before High Courts, Article 226, or the Supreme Court, Article 32. Stringent disqualification under the RPA purges criminalization from politics, while appellate remedies uphold natural justice and democratic representation. Question 12. Parliament's power to amend the Constitution is a limited power, and it cannot be enlarged into absolute power. In the light of this statement, explain whether Parliament under Article 368 of the Constitution can destroy the basic structure of the Constitution by expanding its amending power. The constituent power of Parliament under Article 368 is a derived limited power distinction from the plenary constituent power of the original Constituent Assembly. In the landmark Minerva Mills versus Union of India 1980 case, the Supreme Court famously observed, a limited amending power is one of the basic features of the Indian Constitution, and therefore the limitation on that power cannot be destroyed. Amending power limitation vector. Limited amending power, Article 368 cannot alter basic structure. Kesavananda Bharti. An attempted absolute expansion, example Article 368(4)(5) struck down Minerva Mills. if you if you done if you are done with the static syllabus, you will know all these things. You are aware of all these things. So can parliament destroy the basic structure by expanding its power? No, parliament cannot expand its power to absolute terms. Earlier it was not the case, by the way, but now it is. The basic structure doctrine, Kesavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala 1973, established that Article 368 does not grant authority to alter the foundational framework of the Constitution. An amending authority cannot transform itself into a sovereign constituent assembly by removing its own constitutional boundaries. Invalidation of absolute power clause. The 42nd Amendment inserted clauses 4 and 5 into Article 368, stating that the constitutional amendments could not be questioned in any court and establishing unlimited constituent power. In Minerva Mills 1980, the Supreme Court struck down these clauses, ruling that expanding a limited power into an absolute power undermines the core constitutional design. Judicial review as an inviolable bedrock. Judicial review Article 32 and 226 is itself a basic feature. L. Chandra Kumar, Parliament cannot amend Article 368 to immunize constitutional amendments from judicial scrutiny. Core basic structure safeguards. Inviolable pillar, constitutional significance. So constitutional supremacy. Wait. Constitutional supremacy prevents legislative supremacy from overriding the foundational text. Separation of powers, maintain checks and balances among legislature, executive, and judiciary. Fundamental rights and DPSP harmony preserves the balance between articles 14, 19, 21, and directive principles. The limited nature of amending power preserves constitutional supremacy over parliamentary majorities, ensuring the Constitution continues to serve as an enduring charter of democratic liberty. Question 13. The reservation of seats for women in the institutions of local self-government has had a limited impact on the patriarchal character of the Indian political process. Comment. The 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Acts mandate a minimum of 33% reservation for women in panchayats and municipalities. Article 243D and 243T with over 20 states, raising it to 50% while bringing over 1.4 million women into grassroots governance. Its ability to dismantle entrenched political patriarchy exhibits structural limitations. Women political reservation impact. So transformative grassroots gains, patriarchal retrenchment. Why impact on political patriarchy has been limited? Proxy governance, Sarpanchpati syndrome. In many rural regions, male relatives, husbands, father-in-laws exercises operational, administrative, and financial authorities, relegating elected women representatives (EWR) to nominal figureheads. Resistance to vertical political mobility. Grassroots numerical representation has not translated into proportional tickets or legislative presence in state assemblies or parliament, where female representation historically remained around 10 to 14%. Patriarchal gatekeeping in political parties. Political party leadership remains male dominated, treating women's local quotas as instruments to preserve family seats rather than building independent female leadership cadres. Institutional neglect and capacity deficits. The bureaucratic paternalism and limited digital procedural capacity building perpetuate dependence on male intermediaries. Emerging positive shifts and transformation. Policy prioritization. EWR demonstrate measurable impacts by prioritizing public goods, drinking water sanitization, Swachh Bharat, maternal health, and girls' schooling, MIT Duflo studies. Growing assertiveness, increasing numbers of second and third term women sarpanch are actively asserting independence and leading Gram Sabha debates. Dismantling political patriarchy requires moving beyond descriptive representation to substantive empowerment, supported by training under Rashtriya Gram Swaraj Abhiyan and operationalizing the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam. Question 4. The Attorney General is the chief legal advisor and the lawyer of the Government of India. Discuss. Appointed under Article 76 of the Constitution, the Attorney General for India is the highest law officer in the country, serving as the primary legal advisor to the Union Executive and the Chief Counsel, representing the Government of India before the higher judiciary. Attorney General mandate, architecture, advisory mandate, Article 76(2), litigation representation and parliamentary role, Article 88. So, Attorney General as Chief Legal Advisor. Again, a static question, okay? Advisory functions, Article 76(2), advises the Union government on complex constitutional and statutory matters referred by the President, ensuring executive policies align with constitutional limits. Presidential references, Article 143 represents the Union executive during advisory references sought by the President from the Supreme Court on vital public questions. The Attorney General as chief lawyers of the government, senior counsel for the Union, mandates to appear on behalf of the Government of India in all proceedings in the Supreme Court and High Courts involving the Union, non-partisan constitutional standing while holding office during the pleasure of the President. The AGI is a constitutional officer rather than a political appointee, maintaining professional neutrality. Special constitutional rights and institutional limitations. Prerogative or right, constitutional scope. Audience across courts enjoys the right of pre-audience in all courts across the territory of India. Article 76(3). Parliamentary participation, right to speak and participate in proceeding of both houses and joint committees. Article 88. Though without the right to vote. Private practice restrictions. May engage in private practice but is barred from advising or holding briefs against the Government of India or defending accused persons in criminal prosecutions without government sanction. The Attorney General balances legal counsel with judicial advocacy, ensuring executive actions comply with the rule of law and constitutional standards. Question 15. Individual parliamentarians' role as the national lawmaker is on a decline, which in turn had adversely impacted the quality of debates and their outcomes. Discuss. The constitutional design of parliamentary democracy positions an elected member of parliament MP as a national lawmaker and an institutional check on the executive in recent decades. Party whip enforcement and institutional decline have reduced individual MPs to partisan voters, affecting the quality of legislative scrutiny. Decline of individual lawmaker role. So, anti-defection rigidities, guillotine bypass scrutiny, marginal private members bills. So you can go through these factors driving the decline of individual parliamentarians. The rigidity of the 10th schedule, anti-defection law, the threat of disqualification for defying party whips, Article 1022, suppress free debate, voting according to conscience and independent constituency representation. Decline in legislative committee scrutiny, a declining proportion of bills are referred to departmentally related standing committees, DRSCs, for clause by clause evaluation, bypassing deep MP-led review. Frequent use of guillotines and voice votes. Complex financial and legislative packages are passed through guillotined debate or rapid voice votes during floor disruptions. Marginalization of private member bills. Limited parliamentary time allocated for private members' business. No private member bills has No private members bill has passed into law since 1970. Oh. Adverse impacts on debates and legislative outcomes. Executive dominance lawmaking is increasingly driven by executive decrees and ordinances, Article 123, weakening the legislature's oversight function. Poor drafting and increased legislation. Hurried legislation without debate often results in statutory ambiguities forcing subsequent judicial intervention. Declining sittings and deliberation. Sittings of parliament have dropped from an average of 120 days per year in the 1950s to under 65 days, limiting deliberative time. Revitalizing the lawmaker's role requires limiting party whips strictly to confidence motions. Dinesh Goswami Committee and mandating pre-legislative consultative scrutiny and institutionalizing minimum annual parliamentary sittings. In the context of the neoliberal paradigm of development planning, multi-level planning is expected to make operations cost-effective and remove many implementation blockages. Discuss. The neoliberal paradigm emphasizes market orientation, fiscal discipline, and minimum government intervention. Within this framework, multi-level planning shifts governance from centralized top-down command into decentralized bottom-up planning across national, state, and local tiers. Article 243G and 243W. Multi-level planning architecture, information asymmetry cuts, optimized fiscal outlays, removing implementation gaps. Making operation cost effective, elimination of enforcement asymmetry. Local institutions, panchayat, municipalities understand micro level ground realities, eliminating fiscal wastage on ill conceived standardized schemes. Second ARC 6 report. Targeted resource allocation, flexible substate planning over. Flexible substate planning allows convergence of multiple line departments, cutting administrative duplication and project cost overruns. Leveraging local resources mobilizes matching local community contributions, private capital and voluntary labor, shramdan, lowering public capital, lowering public capital outlays, removing implementation blockages, active stakeholder ownership involving beneficiaries in project co-design reduces public resistance, litigation and land acquisition delays. Rapid bureaucratic debottlenecking, decentralizing financial approvals to district planning committees, Article 243ZD prevents project stagnation in state capitals. Accountability via social audits, grassroots scrutiny through regular gram sabhas minimizes leakage and rent seeking. Structural caveats. Without fiscal decentralization, united funds and technical capacity building at the grassroots, multi-level planning risk remaining a multi-level planning risks remaining a formal administrative exercise. Integrating multi-level planning into neoliberal governance strengthens operational efficiency and democratizes public service delivery, advancing SDG 16 inclusive institutions. Question 17. The need for cooperation among various service sectors has been an inherent component of development discourse. Partnerships, bridges bring the gap among the sectors. It also sets in motion a culture of collaboration and team spirit. In the light of statements above, examine India's development process. The modern developmental the modern development process is inherently complex. The modern development process is inherently complex, requiring deep cross-sectional synergy rather than isolated departmental functioning. Establishing collaborative partnerships among public, private, and civil society service sectors is vital for sustainable, inclusive national development. Multi-sectoral service synergy. The public-private interfaces, interdepartmental silo cuts, and civil society intermediation. Breaking silos in India's development process. Interdepartmental convergence platforms like PM Gati Shakti integrate multi-modal planning across railways, highways, ports, and telecom, replacing administrative silos with institutional coordination, public-private civic synergies, healthcare. The Ayushman Bharat PMJ network links public insurance funds with impaneled private hospitals and grassroots ASHA workers. Education, collaboration among edtech firms, NGOs, example Pratham and state education departments under the National Education Policy NEP 2020. Digital Public Infrastructure DPI, the India Stack, Aadhaar, UPI, DigiLocker, ONDC connects public regulators, private fintech players and end consumers, driving financial inclusion. Disaster management and civic action, coordinated responses among the National Disaster Response Force, NDRF, civil defense volunteers, and private telecom operators during natural calamities. Persistent challenges, interdepartmental turf wars, rigid bureaucratic hierarchies, mistrust between state agencies and civil society organizations, and asymmetry risk sharing in public private contracts. Fostering a collaborative team spirit across service sectors creates a whole of society approach, accelerating progress towards inclusive growth and UN Sustainable Development Goals. Question 18: performance of welfare schemes that are implemented for vulnerable sections is not so effective due to absence of their awareness and active involvement at all stages of policy process. Discuss. India maintains an expansive social safety net, yet welfare interventions for vulnerable groups SC, ST, women, elderly women, SC, ST, women, elderly, informal workers often face implementation deficit, treating beneficiaries as passive recipients rather than active stakeholders, limits intended welfare outcomes. Participatory policy deficit, information asymmetry and exclusion, absence of stakeholder involvement, impact of low awareness and non-involvement, awareness deficit and information asymmetry, complex documentation requirements and digital barriers, example portal only registrations, create administrative friction for illiterate beneficiaries, lack of rights based awareness enables local intermediaries and middlemen to exploit target groups. Top down policy formulation, policies designed in central administrative silos often fail to address localized socio-cultural realities, example designing community toilets without securing continuous water connections, absence of co-creation and feedback loops, excluding vulnerable groups from design and mid-course appraisals leads to poor scheme adoption and misaligned welfare delivery, weak grassroots social audits, ineffective institutionalization of social audits, except partially in Magnarega, prevents local communities from identifying leakages. Practical administrative solution, policy stage participatory administrative intervention, design and formulation, mandatory public consultation in local vernacular languages and gender responsive budgeting, awareness generation, deploying frontline community workers, ASHA, Anganwadi, bank sakhis and visual non-textual outreach, monitoring and audit, institutionalizing mandatory Gram Sabha social audits and community scorecards, transitioning from paternalistic welfare distribution to participatory empowerment under Article 41 ensures welfare benefits reach intended recipients effectively. Question 19. The long sustained image of India as a leader of the oppressed and marginalized nations has disappeared on account of its newfound role in the emerging global order. Elaborate. Historically, India's foreign policy was defined by its Historically, India's foreign policy was defined by its moral leadership of the newly decolonized world through the neo-aligned movements. Through the non-aligned movements, NAM, anti-apartheid advocacy, and Afro-Asian solidarity, Bandung Conference. Critics suggest that India's integration into major power dynamics has diluted this posture through recent actions demonstrate a re-articulated leadership model. So evaluation of India's global posture, and you can see shifts toward major power minilaterals, revitalized voice of global south. Arguments supporting the shift away from the moral leadership, pragmatic strategic alignments, deeper integration into Western security arrangements, and unilateral groupings. Quad I2U2 reflects hard realpolitik priorities, economic realism over ideology. Foreign policy now focuses heavily on attracting high-tech investments, energy corridors, and securing critical supply chains. Dilution of traditional non-alignment, reduced diplomatic focus on the classical NAM platform in favor of transactional multi-alignment. Example, simultaneously engagement with the West, Russia, and West Asia. The counter reality, a modern voice of the global south. Championing the developing world, spearheaded the historic inclusion of the African Union as a permanent member of the G20 during India's presidency. Institutionalizing global south agendas, convened consecutive voice of the Global South summits to channel developing world concerns on debt, sustainability, food security, and energy access into multilateral forums. Moral humanitarian assistance, deploying development aid via lines of credit without debt trapped, conditionalities coupled with initiatives like vaccine Maitri and disaster relief operations. Climate justice advocacy, leading the International Solar Alliance and defending the common but differentiated responsibility principle at COP forums. India has not abandoned the marginalized. It has transitioned from ideological moralizing to pragmatic developmental leadership, bridging the divide between the global south and the industrialized world. Question 20. What introduces friction into the ties between India and the United States is that Washington is still unable to find for India a position in its global strategy which would satisfy India's national self-esteem and ambitions. Explain with suitable examples. The India-US relationship has expanded into a comprehensive global strategic partnership driven by shared democratic values and common geopolitical interest in the Indo-Pacific. However, friction persists because Washington often views partnerships through an alliance lens, whereas New Delhi insists on preserving its strategic autonomy. India-US India-US structural divergence. Washington traditional framework and New Delhi's strategic imperative. So, according to Washington, formal alliance alignment expectations, conditional tax transfer, and sanction threats. New Delhi non-negotiable strategic autonomy, multi-alignment, and independent foreign policy. Absolutely. Key sources of friction and divergence: strategic autonomy versus alliance expectations. The US historically relies on treaty-bound junior allies, NATO bilateral ASEAN pacts. In contrast, India rejects formal alliance constraints, pursuing independent strategic partnerships. Example, India's procurement of Russian S-400 missile systems, despite CARTSA sanction pressures and its independent diplomatic stance on the Russia-Ukraine war. Look, you might think that why it is mentioning Russia-Ukraine war if the question is asked in 2019. You need to understand the question, although asked in the year 2019, but the answer is as per the latest developments. Okay, so that you will and I will have the access to the current most information, and if something related to this asked in future examination, so we could answer it. Divergent threats perception and regional priorities. Washington views Indo-Pacific security. Washington views Indo-Pacific security primarily through a maritime lens countering China, whereas India faces immediate continental land border disputes along the line of actual control. Technology transfer conditionalities, delays and export controls. ITA are historically limited high-end defense co-production through frameworks like ICET, and the GE jet engine co-production deal represent positive course corrections. Trade friction and climate conditionalities. Disagreements at the WTO regarding agricultural subsidies, generalized system of preferences, GSP revocation, and differing timelines on fossil fuel phase outs. Domestic governance scrutiny, US commentary on internal Indian issues, minority rights, freedom, press freedom, creates diplomatic friction with India's sovereign national self-esteem. A durable India-US partnership requires mutual recognition. Washington engaging India as an independent geopolitical pillar, and both democracies managing disagreements through mature institutionalized strategic dialogue.